Prison was quiet in the early hours of the morning. Not peaceful, just heavy. The kind of quiet that pressed down on a man's chest and reminded him that time was no longer something he controlled. In cell 217, Marcus Reed sat on the edge of his narrow bed, hands folded, eyes fixed on the concrete floor. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, the fabric worn thin from years of use. Tomorrow morning, at exactly 8 a.m., his sentence would be carried out. Everyone knew it. The guards, the warden, the chaplain, and Marcus. He had spent the night doing what he'd done so many nights before, remembering. Not the crime, not the trial, but the dog. A soft knock came at the bars. Marcus looked up slowly. Officer Daniels stood outside the cell, keys hanging from his belt. He wasn't young and he wasn't hardened either. His eyes carried the kind of tired you only got from years of watching men reach the end of their road. "Reed," Daniels said quietly. "You got 5 minutes with the chaplain if you want them." Marcus shook his head. "No," he said. His voice was steady. "I already said what I needed to say." Daniels hesitated. "There's also one last request," he added. "If you have one." Marcus lifted his head fully now. "One?" he asked. Daniels nodded. "Within reason." Marcus exhaled slowly, as if he'd been holding the breath for years. "Yes," he said. "I do." Daniels leaned closer to the bars. Marcus met his eyes. "I want to see my dog." The silence that followed was immediate. Daniels straightened slightly. "Your dog?" "Yes," Marcus said. "The police dog." Daniels frowned. "You mean the K9 from your case?" Marcus nodded once. "His name is Atlas." Daniels looked down the hallway, then back at Marcus. "You know that dog was evidence," he said. "And he's still active duty." "I know," Marcus replied. "That's why I'm asking now." Daniels hesitated again. "Why?" he asked, unable to stop himself. Marcus looked back down at his hands. "Because," he said quietly, "he's the only one who knows the truth about what really happened." Daniels felt a chill crawl up his spine. "That dog," Marcus continued, "didn't arrest me." He looked up again, eyes clear. "He tried to protect someone." Daniels stared at him. "You saying the dog got it wrong?" he asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I'm saying the dog did exactly what he was trained to do." The hallway seemed colder now. Daniels took a step back. "I can't promise anything," he said. "This isn't standard." "I know," Marcus replied. "But it's my last request." Daniels studied him for a long moment. No panic, no desperation, just certainty. "I'll talk to the warden," Daniels finally said. Marcus nodded. "Thank you." As Daniels walked away, Marcus leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes. Somewhere beyond the concrete and steel, a dog was still working, still loyal, still silent. And tomorrow, that silence might finally speak. The warden's office smelled faintly of old paper and black coffee. Warden Ellen Brooks listened without interrupting as Officer Daniels explained the request. She didn't lean back in her chair, didn't frown or scoff. She simply listened. "A K9 visit?" she repeated when Daniels finished. "For a death row inmate?" "Yes, ma'am." "And the dog is still active?" "Very much so," Daniels said. "Assigned to Metro K9 unit. Handler's name is Officer Grant." Brooks folded her hands. "Reed's case is closed," she said. "Appeals exhausted. Execution scheduled." Daniels nodded. "I know. Then why now?" Daniels hesitated. "He said the dog knows the truth." Brooks raised an eyebrow. "Dogs don't testify." "No," Daniels said carefully. "But handlers do, and evidence does." The warden stood and walked to the window overlooking the yard. Prisoners were already lining up for morning count. "What exactly did this dog do during the arrest?" she asked. Daniels cleared his throat. The dog bypassed Reed and locked onto a second individual during the raid, he said. But Reed confessed. Case moved fast. Brooks turned slowly. Why did the dog ignore the suspect who confessed? Daniels didn't answer, because that question had bothered him for years. Brooks exhaled. Bring me the file, she said. 2 hours later, she was still reading. Photos, body cam transcripts, K9 deployment notes. One line was circled in red ink. K9 Atlas broke command and shielded juvenile female. Brooks stared at it. That's not a bite, she murmured. She picked up the phone. Get me Officer Grant. Across the city, Officer Caleb Grant knelt beside Atlas in the K9 yard, clipping a lead to the dog's collar. Atlas was a massive Belgian Malinois, muscles coiled beneath his coat, eyes sharp and attentive. What is it, boy? Grant asked. Atlas's ears flicked. Grant's phone buzzed. Grant, he answered. This is Warden Brooks, the voice said. I need you and Atlas at Greenridge Prison. Today. Grant froze. Prison? He repeated. For what purpose? There's an inmate requesting a visit, Brooks said. By name. By dog. Grant looked down at Atlas. The dog's tail was still, focused. Ma'am, Grant said carefully. Atlas doesn't visit inmates. Today he does, Brooks replied. And I suggest you bring the original case file. Grant swallowed. Yes, ma'am. He hung up and crouched beside Atlas, resting a hand on his chest. You hear that? He murmured. Looks like we're going back. Atlas looked up at him. For the first time in years, the dog's ears flattened, as if he remembered. Meanwhile, in cell 217, Marcus Reed sat quietly as the chaplain passed by. He didn't ask for prayer. He didn't ask for mercy. He simply waited, because the one witness who had never lied was finally on his way. The approval came through just after noon. Stamped. Signed. Final. Warden Brooks stood in the corridor outside death row, the document still warm from the printer in her hands. Around her, officers moved with quiet efficiency, but something about today felt different. Unsettled. Transport protocol? One of the guards asked. Standard, Brooks replied. No contact. Controlled environment. She paused. And record everything. In cell 217, Marcus Reed heard the footsteps before he saw anyone. Officer Daniels stopped at the bars and cleared his throat. It's been approved, he said. Marcus didn't react at first. Approved was a word he hadn't heard in years. You'll get 10 minutes, Daniels continued. Glass partition. Handler present. Marcus nodded slowly. Thank you. Daniels studied him. You understand this doesn't change anything, he said. Your sentence. I know, Marcus interrupted gently. This isn't about me. Daniels said nothing, because somehow he believed him. The K9 transport van arrived just after 2 p.m. Atlas stepped out first. The moment his paws hit the concrete, his posture changed. No wagging, no curiosity, just focus. Officer Grant tightened the lead slightly. You feel it too, don't you? He murmured. Atlas's eyes were locked on the prison entrance. Inside, the visitation room had been cleared. No families, no attorneys, just one table, one chair, one thick pane of reinforced glass. Marcus was brought in first. He sat down slowly, wrists cuffed in front of him, eyes fixed on the empty space beyond the glass. Then the door on the opposite side opened. Atlas entered. The dog stopped, completely still. His ears lifted. His breathing slowed. Officer Grant felt it instantly. That's not normal, he muttered. Atlas pulled once on the leash. Not hard, but deliberate. Grant allowed it. The dog moved closer to the glass. Marcus lifted his head. For the first time in years, his expression broke. Hey boy, he whispered. Atlas let out a low sound. Not a bark. Not a growl. A recognition. The room went silent. Atlas sat, directly in front of Marcus. Officer Grant's heart began to race. Because Atlas only sat like that for one reason. Guard mode. Protection. Atlas's body angled slightly toward Marcus. Between him and the guards behind the glass. Marcus raised his cuffed hands slowly. "You remember," he said quietly. Atlas's tail thumped once against the floor. Officer Grant swallowed hard. "What the hell?" he whispered. Warden Brooks leaned forward, hands braced on the glass. "Start the playback," she ordered. A technician nodded and pulled up the original K9 bodycam footage on the monitor mounted in the corner. The room filled with shaky video and heavy breathing. A voice echoed from years ago. "Release K9. Atlas's ears flicked. On the screen, the younger Atlas burst into frame. And then, he ran past Marcus, straight toward someone else. A smaller figure. A girl. The room froze. Marcus closed his eyes. "That's why I confessed," he said softly. "So she wouldn't be touched." Atlas stood, placed himself directly between Marcus and the guards. Officer Grant felt his stomach drop. Because the dog wasn't reacting to the past. He was reacting to the truth. The footage kept playing. Static hissed. Boots pounded. A voice shouted commands that overlapped each other in panic. The camera angle jerked as the handler ran. On the screen, the younger Atlas lunged. Not at Marcus, who stood frozen with his hands up, but past him, straight toward the shadow near the stairwell. The girl. She couldn't have been more than 15. Hoodie too big. Hands shaking. Eyes wide with fear. The dog didn't bite. He didn't tackle. He did something far more specific. Atlas positioned his body in front of her and barked. Sharp, controlled. Forcing officers to slow to reassess. Officer Grant felt his throat tighten. "That's a shield," he said quietly. "That's not pursuit." Warden Brooks stared at the screen. "Why wasn't this in the report?" she asked. Daniels didn't answer. Because the answer was already written in the margins of every rushed investigation. Every closed case that needed to be finished fast. On the other side of the glass, Marcus kept his eyes closed. "I told them I did it," he said. "They didn't ask why the dog ran past me." Atlas shifted his weight, still standing between Marcus and the guards, posture unwavering. "He never forgot her," Marcus continued. "Neither did I." Officer Grant knelt slowly, keeping his movements calm. "Atlas," he said softly. "Down." The dog didn't respond. Grant tried again. "Atlas. Down." Nothing. Atlas's gaze stayed fixed. Not on Marcus, but on the corridor behind him. On the uniformed presence. On authority. Grant's voice cracked. "He thinks he's still on duty," he said. Warden Brooks turned sharply. "Can he be wrong?" Grant shook his head once. "No," he said. "Atlas doesn't improvise. He responds to threat patterns." He looked at Marcus. "Why didn't you say anything at trial?" Marcus opened his eyes. "Because she was a kid," he said. "And because the men looking at me weren't interested in listening to a dog." Silence filled the room. The technician paused the video. On the frozen frame, Atlas stood squarely between the girl and the officers. Head high, body tense, unyielding. Warden Brooks straightened. "Get me internal affairs," she said. "And the juvenile records clerk." Daniels swallowed. "Ma'am." "The execution." Brooks raised a hand. "Is suspended," she said. "Effective immediately." Across the glass, Atlas finally relaxed just enough to sit. Marcus let out a breath he'd been holding for years. "Good boy," he whispered. For the first time since Atlas had entered the room, his tail wagged. Not in excitement. In relief. The room didn't erupt into chaos. There were no raised voices. No dramatic gestures. Just a slow, almost imperceptible shift. Like the ground moving beneath people who had believed it was solid. Warden Brooks didn't sit down. She remained standing, hands resting on the edge of the table, eyes locked on the paused frame of the video. "Atlas." The girl. The line his body formed between them. A line that should have mattered. How old was she? Brooks asked quietly. The technician hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. She was processed as a juvenile witness, he said. But her file was sealed. Unseal it, Brooks replied. That requires. I'll take responsibility, Brooks cut in. Do it. A few keystrokes echoed in the room, loud in the silence. Officer Grant felt his pulse in his ears. Atlas had finally laid down, but his head remained lifted, eyes tracking every movement, every tone shift, still working, still evaluating, still protecting. The file opened. Name redacted. Age 14. Status. Material witness. Never called to testify. Daniels leaned forward, his face pale. There's no way, he said. She was in the building when the arrest happened. Why wasn't she interviewed? The technician scrolled. She was, he said, briefly, but her statement contradicts the arresting officer's timeline. Brooks closed her eyes for a moment. Read it. The technician swallowed and began. Subject states that Marcus Reed told her to hide behind the stairwell and remain silent. Subject states Reed raised his hands immediately. Subject states K9 Atlas ran past Reed and stood in front of her, barking until officers slowed down. The words hung in the air. Officer Grant felt something heavy settle in his chest. That's a protective response, he said. Atlas assessed her as vulnerable. He wasn't responding to Marcus as a threat. He was responding to the officer's momentum. Brooks opened her eyes. And that never made it to court, she said. No, ma'am, the technician replied. The statement was sealed the same day Reed confessed. Daniels looked at Marcus through the glass. Why confess? He asked, voice low. You knew this could have saved you. Marcus leaned back in his chair, chains clinking softly. I knew it would save her, he said. And I knew it wouldn't save me. Atlas lifted his head slightly at the sound of Marcus's voice. Grant noticed. He still responds to you, he said quietly. Marcus smiled faintly. He always did, he replied. I fed him treats when his handler wasn't looking. Grant let out a short breath that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. Damn it, he muttered. Brooks turned sharply toward him. Officer Grant, she said, in your professional opinion, if this footage and this statement had been presented at trial, what would have happened? Grant didn't hesitate. The jury would have seen reasonable doubt, he said. At minimum, possibly full exoneration. Brooks nodded once. Then we have a problem, she said. She turned to Daniels. Contact the district attorney. Immediately. Daniels hesitated. Ma'am, this case is 8 years old. Brooks's voice hardened. So is the mistake. Across the glass, Marcus watched Atlas closely. You did good, he murmured. Atlas stood and moved closer to the glass again, sitting directly in front of Marcus, mirroring him. Two figures, separated by years, connected by a moment no one had wanted to understand. Outside the room, phones began to ring. Emails were sent. Records requested. Timelines reopened. And for the first time since the cell door had closed behind him all those years ago, Marcus Reed was no longer waiting for the end. He was waiting for the truth to catch up. The name in the juvenile file was still blurred when the call went out. By design, by habit, by fear. Warden Brooks insisted it stay that way for now. Find her, she told Internal Affairs. Quietly, no media, no uniforms. The man on the other end of the line hesitated. Ma'am, it's been 8 years. Brooks's voice didn't change. So has his sentence. Marcus Reed was escorted back to his cell that evening, but nothing about it felt the same. The door still clanged shut. The lights still hummed. The walls were still concrete. But the weight, the finality had shifted. Officer Daniels walked beside him, slower than usual. They've postponed the execution indefinitely, he said. Pending review. Marcus nodded. I know, he replied. Daniels stopped walking. You don't seem surprised. Marcus looked at him. I didn't ask to see Atlas to be saved, he said. I asked because he remembers what people tried to forget. Daniels swallowed. Atlas spent the night in a secure K-9 holding room. Officer Grant sat on the floor beside him long after protocol said he should have left. You were right, Grant said quietly. I should have listened. Atlas rested his head on Grant's knee. The handler closed his eyes. 3 days later, a woman walked into a federal building in another state. She was in her early 20s now, hair pulled back, hands clenched tight at her sides. She gave her name to the clerk, this time without shaking. When the agent introduced himself, she didn't sit right away. You found him, didn't you? She asked. The agent paused. Yes, he said. Marcus Reed. Her shoulders dropped just slightly. I told the truth, she said. I always did. The agent nodded. We know. She took a breath that sounded like relief and grief tangled together. They told me if I talked, she continued, my foster placement would be reconsidered. The room went still. They said he confessed, she added. So there was nothing left to say. The agent pressed record. And the dog? He asked. Her eyes softened. He stood in front of me, she said. Didn't move. Didn't let anyone near me. She smiled faintly. He was shaking, she said. But he stayed. Back at Greenridge Prison, the evidence board filled the wall. Timelines rewritten. Statements re-examined. Bodycam footage synced with K-9 telemetry. Every version of the story collapsed into one undeniable truth. Marcus Reed had raised his hands. Atlas had chosen to protect. And someone had decided that didn't fit the narrative. The district attorney arrived in person. He didn't smile. We're reopening the case, he said. Effective immediately. Warden Brooks nodded. And Marcus Reed? The DA exhaled. He's no longer on death row. The room was silent. Officer Grant stood in the visitation room again days later. This time there was no glass. Marcus entered slowly, dressed in standard inmate gray. Atlas saw him, and for the first time, he broke posture. The dog surged forward, tail wagging hard, whining low. Grant let go of the lead. Atlas reached Marcus and pressed his head into his chest. Hard. Marcus laughed, a sound rough and unfamiliar. Easy, boy, he whispered, hands shaking as they found the dog's fur. Grant turned away. Some truths were too heavy to watch all at once. The hearing was scheduled for 48 hours later. No cameras, no press release, no warning. Officially, it was labeled a procedural review. The kind of thing that happened behind closed doors, buried in legal language no one outside the system ever read. But everyone in that room knew the truth. This wasn't a review. It was a reckoning. Marcus Reed was brought into the federal courtroom just after sunrise. Not in shackles. Not under heavy guard. Just cuffs at the wrists loose enough to allow movement. That alone told him something had changed. Officer Daniels walked beside him, not as an escort now, but almost as a guide. You ready? Daniels asked quietly. Marcus nodded. I've been ready for 8 years. They entered the courtroom. It was smaller than Marcus had imagined. Wood-paneled. No jury box. Just a long table, several judges, and a row of people who had avoided eye contact with him for most of a decade. The prosecutor sat stiffly, jaw clenched. Defense counsel, new counsel, met Marcus's eyes and gave a single nod. At the far side of the room, Officer Grant stood with Atlas. The dog was calm, alert, still working. Marcus felt his chest tighten at the sight. Warden Brooks took her seat and opened the session herself. This hearing is convened to review newly uncovered evidence, she said evenly, pertaining to the conviction of Marcus Reed. She didn't look at him when she spoke his name. She looked at the file. Specifically, she continued, The actions of K9 Atlas during the original arrest. A murmur rippled through the room. The prosecutor rose. Your Honor, he began. This case was settled by confession, which has since been called into question. Brooks interrupted. Sit down. The prosecutor obeyed. Brooks nodded to Officer Grant. Bring the dog forward. Grant stepped up with Atlas at heel. The judges leaned forward. Officer Grant, Brooks said, in your professional opinion, does K9 Atlas respond emotionally or instinctively? Instinctively, Grant replied without hesitation. He's trained to identify threats and protect vulnerable subjects. And does he recognize Marcus Reed? Grant glanced down at Atlas. Yes, he said. Without doubt. Brooks nodded once. Then let's be very clear, she said. Why? She gestured to the technician. Play the footage. The screen lit up again. The same moment. The same decision. Atlas bypassing Marcus. Atlas standing firm in front of the girl. Not attacking. Not hesitating. Protecting. One of the judges leaned back slowly. That's not an error, she said. That's intent. Another judge turned to the prosecutor. Why was this dismissed? The prosecutor swallowed. It was deemed inconclusive. Inconclusive? The judge repeated. The dog contradicted the theory of the case. Brooks's voice was steady but sharp, and the juvenile witness statement was sealed without court approval. Silence. Then, a soft sound. Atlas had sat directly in front of Marcus. The room froze. Grant felt his breath catch. That posture, he said quietly, means he's guarding. Marcus didn't move, didn't speak. He just looked down at the dog. You still remember, he whispered. The judges exchanged looks. One of them exhaled slowly. This court is suspending the conviction, she said. Effective immediately. The words hit the room like a shockwave. Marcus felt the air leave his lungs. Suspending. Not reviewing. Not delaying. Suspending. Brooks didn't smile. This matter will be retried, she continued, with all evidence presented, including K9 testimony and juvenile witness accounts. She looked directly at Marcus for the first time. Mr. Reed, she said, you will be transferred out of death row custody today. Marcus closed his eyes, not in relief, in disbelief. As the hearing adjourned, Grant knelt beside Atlas. You did it, he murmured. Atlas looked up. No pride, no celebration, just duty fulfilled. Marcus was let out, not back to his cell, but to a holding room bathed in daylight. Daniels paused at the door. They're calling it unprecedented, he said. Marcus looked at him. No, he replied. They're calling it overdue. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars passed. Phones buzzed. Lives continued. But inside that building, the case had changed. Not because a man begged. Not because a system felt guilty. But because a dog refused to forget what he was trained to protect. Marcus didn't sleep that night. Not because of noise. Not because of fear. But because his body didn't understand what his mind had just heard. Suspended conviction. The words kept repeating over and over, as if they might vanish if he stopped thinking them. The holding cell he'd been placed in was brighter than his old one. A narrow window let in pale moonlight. The door didn't slam shut the way death row doors did, it closed softly. That alone felt wrong. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on his knees, staring at nothing. 8 years of waking up knowing the date. 8 years of counting steps. 8 years of preparing to die. And now, nothing was certain anymore. Uncertainty felt heavier than the sentence ever had. Across the facility, Officer Grant lay awake too. Atlas slept on the floor beside his bed, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Grant watched the dog for a long time. You saved him, Grant whispered. Atlas's ear twitched, but he didn't wake. Grant exhaled slowly. No, he corrected himself. You just did your job. And that somehow felt even bigger. The next morning, Marcus was escorted, not marched, to a conference room. There was coffee on the table. Real coffee. He stared at it like it might be a trick. A woman in a dark suit entered and closed the door behind her. "Mr. Reed," she said. "My name is Lorichin. I've been appointed as your counsel for the retrial." Marcus nodded cautiously. "I'm not used to appointments," he said. She gave a faint, sad smile. "You should have had one like this a long time ago." She opened a folder. "The juvenile witness has agreed to testify," she said. "Voluntarily." Marcus's chest tightened. "She doesn't owe me that," he said. "She says she does," Chin replied. "She says you gave her time." Marcus looked down. Time. That was exactly what it had cost him. Later that afternoon, Marcus was taken to the prison yard. He hadn't been outside during daylight in years. The sun felt wrong. Too warm. Too real. He stood still, squinting slightly, until he felt a familiar presence beside him. Atlas. The dog was brought in on a lead, Officer Grant close behind. Marcus dropped to one knee without thinking. Atlas approached slowly, then pressed his forehead against Marcus's chest. Not guarding now. Grounding. Marcus's hands trembled as they rested on the dog's shoulders. "I don't know how to do this," Marcus admitted quietly. "Being alive again." Atlas pulled back just enough to look at him, then sat, waiting. Grant swallowed. "He'll wait with you," he said. Marcus nodded. "Yeah," he replied. "He always has." News didn't break all at once. It leaked. A legal blog mentioned an unusual canine-based evidentiary reversal. A journalist noticed the sealed juvenile record had been unsealed. Someone filed a public records request. Within days, the story was everywhere. Not Marcus's face, not the execution date, but a still frame from the bodycam footage. A dog standing between a girl and the world. The night before the retrial preparations began, Marcus sat alone again. But this time, the door wasn't a final door. It was just a door. And for the first time since he'd entered the system, he allowed himself to imagine something he'd never let his mind touch before. Not freedom. Not justice. Just mourning. Another one. The courtroom was full this time. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just full. Marcus Reed sat at the defense table in a clean shirt that didn't quite feel like his yet. His hands rested flat on the wood, steady, but his chest felt tight. Across the room, the girl sat with her hands folded in her lap. She was a woman now. When she met Marcus's eyes, she didn't look away. She nodded. Just once. That was all either of them needed. The retrial didn't last long. There was no shouting, no theatrics, just facts that had waited too long to be heard. The footage was played. The K-9 reports were read. The sealed statement was spoken aloud. And then, finally, the judge turned to Officer Grant. "Bring the dog forward." Atlas walked into the courtroom like he always did. Calm, focused, certain. He stopped in front of Marcus and sat. The judge watched closely. "What does that posture mean?" she asked. Officer Grant's voice was quiet. "He's guarding," he said. "He believes this man is not a threat." The judge nodded slowly. After a long moment, she spoke. "Marcus Reed," she said. "This court finds that your original conviction was obtained without full consideration of critical evidence." Marcus held his breath. "You are hereby fully exonerated." The room didn't erupt. It went still. Marcus closed his eyes, not in relief, but in release. 8 years fell away in a single breath. Outside the courthouse, the sun was warm. Too warm. Marcus stood on the steps, unsure where to put his feet, unsure how to exist without walls telling him where to stand. Officer Grant approached, Atlas at his side. "Hey," Grant said gently. "There's something we need to ask you." Marcus looked down at Atlas. The dog looked back. Waiting. Grant cleared his throat. "Atlas is retiring," he said. Effective immediately. He's done his job. Marcus felt his throat tighten. And? He asked. Grant smiled just a little. And he needs a home. Marcus knelt slowly in front of the dog. You don't have to wait anymore, he whispered. Atlas stepped forward and pressed his head into Marcus's chest. Hard. Certain. Marcus laughed. A broken, unfamiliar sound, and wrapped his arms around him. Yeah, he said softly. Neither do I. That night, Marcus sat on the front steps of a small rented house. Atlas lay beside him, head on his knee. The world was quiet but not heavy. Marcus looked up at the sky, stars clear and endless. I spent years thinking silence meant I was forgotten, he said. Turns out, it was just waiting. Atlas's tail thumped once. Steady. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from power. Sometimes it comes from memory, from loyalty, from a dog who stood still when the world rushed past, and refused to move until the truth caught up. And